was the largest moving thing ever created by man. At one moment, it's all of the finest that man creates, and at the next moment, it is all of his folly.
So it was 75 years ago, on April 10th, 1912, when the RMS Titanic, skippered by Captain Edward Smith, set sail from New York from Queenstown, Ireland, on its maiden voyage. The largest and most luxurious vessel afloat would meet its destiny in just 5 days. Dr. Marvin Thomas, an associate professor of European history at the University of Pittsburgh at Bradford, Pennsylvania, recreates the saga of the unsinkable Titanic from its inception.
There are two men involved. One has the name Ismay and the other is Holland. Now you have to remember the competition was very tight, not so much from the Americans, but among the Europeans themselves. The British had the White Star Line and Cunard, and these were two at each other's throat. Then, at the turn of the century, remember, the Germans enter the scene, and the Germans are always bigger and better, and therefore, Ismay, I suppose, is really the father of the absolute colonel, and he says he wants to make ships that will regularly cross good weather, bad weather, and will offer everything better than any other liner afloat.
2 years in the making, the 880-foot-long vessel, which towered above the waterline some 75 feet, would travel at an unheard-of speed of 23 knots.
You have a ship that is 4 blocks long. It is 11 stories high. It is 66,000 tons. And it's moving forward through the water at 38 feet per second. I think you have an idea of the mass volume.
Can you describe some of the elegance aboard that ship?
First of all, they have a Turkish bath with all sorts of gilled cooling rooms and a masseuse. You have dining salons that go the entire length of the ship, and so that you are sitting in a room that is 500 feet long. You have ethereal palm verandas where you can stand after dinner and have your cordial. You have a à la carte restaurant for the wealthier passengers who wish to have private parties. You have one side of the ship is a French boulevard with ivy growing up the side. You have a stateroom originally earmarked for no less a person than J.P. Morgan. That cost you, by the way, $4,635 one way.
The date, April 14th, 1912. The time, 11:40 p.m. The place, 300 miles south of Newfoundland in an iceberg-infested North Atlantic.
Murdoch, the first officer after Captain Smith, in this late hour, Captain Smith obviously was in bed, did exactly what you and I and anyone else would do. He pulled it into reverse and at the same time tried to avoid, which obviously then opened the whole side of the ship. There are experts who say had the Titanic hit the iceberg just straight on, it would have stayed afloat. But it opened up its vulnerable side.
It takes 2.5 hours for the majestic Titanic to slip beneath the waves, during which time an incredible human drama unfolds.
This is the marvelous scene. That, of course, is the Titanic. The orchestra leader gets his men assembled. He begins to play lilting melodies to keep everybody calm. And then the great controversy, what did they play at the last moment? Now, I think the latest historical research on that is correct. It was autumn. Probably the myth or the story that they use Nearer My God to Thee is because Nearer My God to Thee is a lovelier hymn and it's more singable. The other's sort of like a funeral dirge.
And the passengers, I understand we had some of the cream of the crop aboard.
You have all of these very, very prominent people. Perhaps the most illustrious was John Jacob Astor and his wife, newly returning from their honeymoon. Well, there was Isidor Straus, and he is the founder of Macy's, and he and his wife are on board. And there's a very, very touching scene when it was time for them to separate. Mrs. Strauss gives the immortal, "I have been with my husband all of these years, and I'm not about to leave him now." And the two went down together. There's Guggenheim, the famous Guggenheim of the museum in New York that has been dedicated. He's, of course, the gentleman who goes down below, quickly changes to full formal attire with his valet, and says, if I must go down, I'm going down as a gentleman. There were immigration grates that were closed and locked, and they were not to be opened by anyone but the immigration authorities in New York. As the boats are being lowered, they're half filled with the idea that they are supposed to stop at gangways below the immigration barriers that were supposed to be open and let the steerage people on. They were never opened. The last 3 or 4 lifeboats that leave, the immigration people, frantic, broke through the barriers, got up on the decks, and this is recorded. The first and second class gentlemen that were still on board stepped aside to the man and allowed the third class women and children to take those boats. There's no question about that.
Shortly before 2:30 in the morning of the 15th of April, the beginning of the end for more than 2,200 passengers. More than 1,500 of them will perish in the icy waters, including 11 millionaires and hundreds of immigrants who had hoped to fulfill their dreams in America. 732 will survive, of which some 24 are living today.
The water is 28 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, a normal person would last 5 minutes and then would die of hypothermia. There are 1,000 people in the water. You have debris from the ship that has now gone down. It is utter darkness. Half of the people in the lifeboats are saying, we've got to go back and do something. The others say, lead our boats back into that churning cauldron of humanity. So finally, one officer on one of the rowboats says, all right, we're going to empty this one and we're going to go in. He rows back into all the corpses and pulls these people out. He's able to save 3 people. It's pathetic.
Professor Thomas refutes some statements made by Dr. Robert Ballard, the oceanographer who located the Titanic in its icy grave in 1985.
He says the ship is sitting in the bottom of the sea, 50 feet in the mud. Now, if the eyewitness accounts are proper, it's about 20 feet above the keel, which means that the gash, if it exists, and I'm sure it does, is 30 feet below in the mud. He says that the plating buckled, the rivets blew out. Well, maybe that happened when the ship hit the bottom of the sea. If it went in 50 feet into the mud and they estimated it was doing 20 knots as it was descending, that would be enough to buckle the whole side.
What about the treasures? What treasures are still aboard?
There are 1 or 2 accounts by reliable witnesses who said they saw the bursars opening the safes and pulling the things out. Now, they did not make it to the lifeboats. Were they then in the rooms, the staterooms where the safes were? Were they scattered over the ocean floor? I'm afraid if you're looking for a sea chest full of jewels, you're not going to find it.
Is there a lesson to be learned from the sinking of the Titanic?
I don't think you'll ever have another Titanic.
Well, it was a blow to technology, wasn't it?
Oh, yes. But not enough to warn everyone, because you know right after that, 2 years later, you have the First War. As we look back, this is the moment that we use as the cutoff date of the feeling of confidence and then the uneasiness of today.